No applause, please. I know I'm the last one before lunch. I'm keeping everybody from all that wonderful food over there. So, my name is Tim Begin. I have been working a lot in the last few years using data sources in Java, Spring, and Cloud Foundry. So the first part of this, we're going to start with a presentation that came from a rant. I had a very frustrating 45 minutes with a group that I was working with. And so I want to go through the slides and sort of talk how we got to where we were at. At the end, I've got some code examples to look at here. I'm actually putting them together into a more generic set of libraries. But essentially what we did is we took the basic Spring JDBC connections and we were able to create a Teradata service connector for Home Depot. So, first what I would like to talk about, something called the crazy cycle. Dr. Emerson Emmerich talked about the crazy cycle. And what he said was, when he was going through his high school years, his parents got divorced. For whatever reason, their communications broke down, they got divorced. While he was in school at college, getting his degree in psychology, they went ahead and they reunited. They got remarried. While he was doing his PhD thesis, they came to the brink of divorce again. So he started doing some research why, and he talked to them, and then he started doing his own research with some other people in there. And what he found was his mother needed to feel loved, but his father needed to feel respected. When his mother didn't feel loved, she would withhold respect. And when his father didn't feel respected, he would withhold love. So, without love, he withholds respect, and without respect, he withholds love. And so it's this crazy cycle of, I'm not getting what I need, so I'm not giving you what you need, and so on and so forth. I know that this has never happened in my own relationship, but I know that dealing with a lot of different groups, when you're having discussions about how to get things to work, you need to make sure that everybody is communicating and getting the points across and getting what they need. All right? So, we're going to talk about Java Database Connectivity, JDBC. So I want to just make sure everybody understands JDBC, does not get it confused with other things like the YMCA. Just so you know that the YMCA was written by Jacques Morali and Victor Willis, released in November 13th, 1978, and the genre is disco. JDBC was written by Sun Microsystems. February 19th, 1997, Data Access API. While it's fun to stay at the YMCA, it's fun to code in the JDBC. So when you're going to be doing normal JDBC operations, back in the day, you're going to create a JDBC connection. I like to refer to that as like the Oprah database connectivity. What does that mean? Well, you know, Oprah walks in and says, I have a question. Who wants a database connection? But that's not how she says it. She says, who wants a database connection? You get a database connection. 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 Everybody gets a database connection. Everybody gets a database connection. Everybody's really happy. But wait a second, maybe she's not looking so happy. Why is that? Well, maybe she's not happy. He's not happy. We're having performance issues. We're having connectivity issues. We're having unhappy customers. You get technical debt. People are going in across the enterprise. They're all doing their own thing. They're creating technical debt. Luckily, there is a solution. John Oliver. He is here to buy your debt. Okay, really, it would be great to have John Oliver come in and go, oh, I can buy your debt. I'm going to take this all away. But we need to find a better way. So one of the things is you can use the frame in the framework. Spring Framework blurb that's on Wikipedia. An application framework, we've all talked about that. We got some common new project development things. I'm going to come in, I'm going to convert, we're going to transform, we're going to create a new Spring project. How does this normally happen? We import a sample project from Spring, we change all the Hello World references to things in my world, add them to a Git repo, change the project name from Spring example to my project, we commit and push to remote. Does this sound familiar? Okay, so we want to go ahead and speed that up. So now we're going to check out an existing project from Git. We're going to change all the my project references to things in my new project, get all the IDE config files, and then we're going to realize, oh, I didn't change it. I'm going to commit and I'm going to push to the remote. Now I need to add new functionality. I've got a new project. I pulled your project. I need to add functionality. I'm going to choose my story. If I'm pairing, I'm going to confer with my pair. I'm going to use my acceptance criteria. I'm going to create tests that fail. I'm going to write code to make the test pass. I'm going to add them to Git. I'm going to deploy the test. And if I'm pairing, I'm going to switch roles. But in theory and practice are not the same. In practice, they are not. Adding new functionality in practice. True story. But during stand-up, somebody else is going to change what I'm doing. I'm going to receive my instructions, usually by email, in a vague, rambling, specifically ambiguous manner. Yet includes implementation instructions, but no acceptance criteria, and almost, but not completely different than the ticket that was opened. If I'm pairing, I'm going to look for my pair. I'm going to get frustrated, and I'm going to go back to my desk. And then for every language that I can speak in, I'm going to swear. I'm going to reread my instructions. I'm going to copy code from Stack Overflow, run it locally. I'm going to tweak the configurations until something works. The instructions are changed. I find a new job. I retire. Or I die. I add to the Git repo. If I'm pairing, okay, look, we're not pairing. I commit, and I push. The other alternate to this is I can read a presentation that someone created coming from a conference, kind of like this one, with examples that work. And I can take that presentation as gospel, and I can duplicate the presentation implementation, always, for everything, over and over and over. Amen. Dogma, a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as an incontrovertibly true. So, at this point, let's take a little break and let's talk about this. We had a challenge that we were going to convert all the teams at Home Depot to Agile. And we were going to have everybody start moving to PCF. How well do you think that went? Everybody's giving me a thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. It was interesting. You had different levels of teams, different understanding. But what we found was there were a lot of people that like to write a lot of code. There are a lot of people that then like to copy everybody else's code that other people then wrote. And they went on and on and on and on and on. And so what I found was the common theme that was coming through here was people didn't understand Cloud Foundry, which is platform as a service, but they also didn't understand Java, or they didn't understand what Spring does. So I have a whole bunch of people here. Oh, you're okay. You're going to hurt yourself. These guys are nodding. Yes, yes. So what we tried to do is to go through and get people to understand the question is not whether or not Spring Boot is using more memory than this batch process. The question is, do you even need to use this over in Cloud Foundry? Does that make any sense? So that was the biggest challenge. Get people to look at that, say, hey, what am I really trying to do here? Am I going to continue to have to do a lot of work that doesn't need to be done? And the answer is yes. They continually wanted to do more and more and more and more work. So I like to refer to this not as Moore's Law, but as Laura Moore's really, really great observation. To be truly XP, you want to minimize the amount of code that you write, which means that you want to maximize the amount of code that you don't write. So if you're going to go into Spring and continually instantiate objects, you're not using the frame of the framework. If you're taking other people's projects that they took from presentations here, where you had somebody up here giving an example that was this big, had nothing to do with an enterprise thing, and then you get it to sort of work, and then everybody else copies that, I now have 85 copies of code that never needed to be written, that then I need to write tests for, that then I need to do integration tests for, that then I need to go become, and then I need to go. So, is there anybody that experiences this? Why no? Dogma? We're going to just follow this because, hey, it's incontrovertibly true. Oh boy. You know, you get these new toys. So, part of the challenge that we had was that Techopedia explains what an application framework is. You know, Spring is an application framework and a version of control framework. We have all this information, and so the trouble is that many organizations don't read Techopedia. The outcome is that many organizations still code like they're writing for a standalone application running on a standalone server. Is there anybody here that is working on virtual machines? Do you still treat your virtual machine like it's a physical server? Do you know anybody that does? I know that nobody here does. Do you know anybody? I'm asking for a friend. You know, I spent first 6 years of my career, I was in the infantry. I went into the infantry, I was very, very young. And so usually what the infantry prepares you for in a career is to either be a policeman or like an assassin. There's no in between. But the funniest thing is that half of my friends that I was in the military, they're all like policemen. And so they send out pictures on Facebook and stuff. And I remember that there was a huge picture that said, you know, military discount on the marijuana dispensary. Military discount. So all the police are like, I'm wondering how many that they caught because, you know, obviously in the military you can't smoke marijuana. Of course, we don't have the sharpest tools in the shed in the infantry. So that was one of the things we had talked about is that, hey, can I combine discounts? Can I get a veteran discount? And I'm asking for a friend. The result of all of this writing it like it's a physical server is that you have massive amounts of unnecessary code being written over and over and over. Amen. Any fool can know what the point is, but you want to understand dependency injection. That's the definition that Craig Walls comes in. Dependency injection is a $25 term for a 5-cent word. I'm going to explain dependency injection to you. That is dependency injection. As you look over, you've got the receiver, you've got the injector, and then you've got a selection of things that can be injected. This is a Spring framework. As you can see, there's a lot of things in there, right? Got my DAOs, I got my ORMs, my JEE, my web, my AOP, my core. I got all these different objects that I can inject. What's Spring's role in all this? What is it his responsibility? The Spring framework's responsibility is to manage the objects and their life cycle and do all of that for you. So if you are continually instantiating your objects, you're doing the framework's job for it. You're not using the frame within the framework. So, dependency injection, it looks like this. Spring Framework is going to be doing the injection for me. So you, as an application developer, at whatever level, can just let it do its job. So that was a challenge, getting people to understand, hey, I'm having this problem. Is it because you don't understand 12-factor apps or environments or what? I don't know. I like to subscribe to the I want to not care. I don't know. I don't care. I don't want to know. I don't want to care. Unless it's relevant. So the question is, hey, I'm using this platform as a service. What is Cloud Foundry doing with my, where is it going to run? I don't care. So I'm like Honey Badger. I don't care. It's like Groovy. People use Groovy. It's a nice language. We use it with Spock. And the great thing is, Groovy, unlike Java, don't care. So if I want to go test and you got that private, I don't care. I'm going to go get it. So, like to point out there at the bottom, an IOC doesn't just mean dependency injection. We also have service locator. This is very important. We're going to talk about that when we get to the cloud portion of service connectors, because it's a service connector. That means you need a service locator. It's a very important little piece of information. It took us about 3 weeks to get that through our heads. So, how do I learn the frame in the Spring Framework? This was the #1 challenge I had with all these different groups. We would be talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, and people would be like, how do I know this stuff? You know all of this stuff. Well, I'm a consultant. I'm supposed to know. There's 2 things that I do. I mean, I'm basically a marriage counselor. If people could read the instructions and schedule meetings, I'd have to get a real job. So when you want to read the instructions, I found that 87% of all developers can't read instructions before they write code. I mean, it's just physically impossible. The asterisk, it's based on a fictitious study that I made up completely for this slide. But there's help. See, WikiHow. I just went out there and it said, look, how to force yourself to read the instructions first. One can just confront the reasons that you avoid it. I mean, you look at all of the, make yourself look at everything that you could possibly. Determine possible ramifications. Consider important features. I mean, basically, it's force yourself to read the instructions on everything. The toaster, whatever. I'm an engineer. My wife likes to joke, yeah, my husband, he doesn't. No, I read the instructions first on everything. Even IKEA. Even those stupid little pictures. I tape the thing out and I lay the stuff out. The Spring documentation, it's located right here on Spring's homepage. If you look really, really close, it says docs. If you click on that, there's documents in there. And if you look next to it, it says guides. So between the 2 of those, you can find what you're looking for, right? For example, if you're going to use the SMTP mail sender, I want to be able to send mail. You can write all this code. I can have my configuration, I can do my imports, or I could just set the properties and Spring Boot will take care of it for me. Thing about Spring Boot's opinionated, right? Does everybody know what that means? Okay, I'm going to give a bunch of developers an example that you can understand. Go to a bar, and your bartender is opinionated. If you walk up there and say, give me a beer, and you don't tell him what you want, he's going to give you what he likes. But if you say, I want to have a Guinness, then he's going to give you that. That's Spring Boot. Thank you for coming. So, this is just one example. I cannot tell you, well, I can tell you. I found 185 instances in Git that people were creating some sort of mail sender client, which means now I have to test that over and over and over. Amen. If you go into the documentation, remember docs? You hit docs, go into Spring Boot, Appendix A. Here is Appendix A. Common application properties. Let me also highlight this. This sample file is provided as a guideline. Do not copy it in its entirety to your own application. So what you will find in there is all of the different common properties that you can set. I did not know that was there. I opened up that little browser window and I downloaded the code and I dug through there. Had I known that that existed, I would not have copied it in its entirety, but I would have saved a lot of time. So hopefully there's one thing that you took away from. Read the instructions, there they are. So I'm going to kind of go through the code in a few minutes, but I want to give, I know this is day 2, you guys have been drinking from a fire hose. We have time this afternoon to go through the code specifically, but I've had several people that have talked about having this type of an issue. When you do Spring with JDBC template, people have done, is there anybody here that is not familiar with the JDBC template? Good. So, when you want to use a service connector, you're talking about using Cloud Foundry, and I'm going to go ahead and set up Oracle, and so on and so forth. Is everybody familiar with the JDBC string? Okay. If you go back to the JDBC, remember? JDBC, instead of the YMCA, right? That's going to use your JDBC string. If you use your JDBC template, you're still going to give it the same information. It's not changing the implementation, it's just changing who's managing it. And it's the same thing with the service connector. You're still going to give it the same information. The only thing is, now you're going to extend out what Spring's Cloud, and then specifically Pivotal's Cloud Foundry information needs to get that information into the service locator so that it can bring it up and then inject it. One of the things we found out from Teradata themselves is Teradata is not the most popular database in the market. We removed his name because we're pretty sure that people could figure out who he was. There was only 3 of them left. This is the VCAP services. Several people have talked about VCAP services. When you bring up Cloud Foundry, you get all your environment variables and everything up here in VCAP services. You'll notice, what are they doing in here? They're parsing the JSON object, and they're pulling out the information, they're getting the credentials, and they're returning an instance of the data source for Oracle. So they have violated every single benefit of using Spring. They're parsing VCAP JSON. Spring will parse it for you. On startup, you can just refer to it in the dot sequence. If you just if you just set the different variables, it already knows how to create an Oracle instance. So if you just have a variable with it in there, it will create a user service for you. Then you can reference that in an auto wire, and you can just use it. That way I don't have to go back and change my code. I can change configurations, and I can move through my environments, and everybody's happy. That's it. That's all I was going to talk about from a specific setup there. So, are there any questions or any topics that people wanted to go through specifically before I open up my browser? Because it is 12:25, and I know that there were a lot of questions that people had about specific implementations. Please, please, not everybody at once. Okay. What can I talk about here? Because I can go through some code. I can just start talking through how we approach this, and then go from the DAO and the implementation we did for the template, and then move into the service connector. Does that work for everybody? I just lost my... I'm sorry, I believe I just killed my little machine here. So what we did when I was working with the group is we wanted to create a DAO object that everybody could use. So we stole a couple of ideas, like from Ibetus. Ibetus was, has anybody used Ibetus? So you're familiar with having to create all the little XML files with your queries in that? So I really had a good time with that, and I lost my screen. So So what we did is we created a DAO object, and one of the things that I think I was very surprised with is for years and years and years, I've used this model where we had this DAO object, and we would create an abstract base DAO. It would have a reference to the JDBC template. So when we do the injection, the auto wiring and all that, we create our data sources, and then we would inject the data sources, and everybody was happy. So we worked for years and years and years with the DAO, and the DAO and the DAO and the DAO. But now, is anybody familiar with the REST template? Okay. I had this BFO one day. It was a blinding flash of the obvious, and I was like, oh gosh, whoa. If I got to go and I've got to retrieve information from an endpoint, from a RESTful web service, that's a data access object as well. I don't care where I go and get it. I'm just going to go get it, and I'm going to bring it back. That means that this whole base DAO thing just suddenly fell apart. And everybody was like, oh, good point. So we went through and we refactored. So what we said was, you know, this Teradata service connector is a good place for us to stick our base information and so forth so that we can extend out. Hey, why don't we do that and put it up into Artifactory? Then everybody can use it. And everybody looked at me like I had said, hey, let's go run downstairs and punch a nun driving a school bus full of Girl Scouts home from a puppy rescue. I said, no, this really isn't heresy. I said, look, if we build this, then we can put the SQL files in there with our XML, we can load this stuff up, and then we can make it an abstract class with a final method, and then we're sure everybody is going to do it. And people said, oh, wait, yeah, that's a cool idea. And then we put all of the Teradata service connector stuff in there. Okay, my machine is not playing well with the HDMI thing, so. So what we did then is we said, all right, let's take this Teradata service connector, let's put it out there. And then once we did that, we ended up with like a dozen groups. A dozen groups said, hey, can we use that? Sure, it's in Artifactory. So the last count I had, they had 17 different groups that were using this because, lo and behold, people didn't have to duplicate code, they didn't have to duplicate tests, and it took us 85 lines of code to be able to write our own service connector. So I'm hoping that this afternoon, there were a lot of people that wanted to see it. I wish I could throw it up onto the screen at the moment, and I can't because it's not going through there. But essentially what we wanted to do is make sure that you understand here for the service locator, it needs some information in the meta info of the project. So what you're going to do is you're going to put in a file in services, and it's going to be labeled org spring framework cloud foundry service info creator. So you get your service connector creator and your service info creator. So then on startup, when you're loading all the different jars, Spring is going to go through all the different meta information. It's going to look for all your different service definitions in this format, and it's going to put it into its service locator. Once that's up in its service locator, you're telling it, hey, when you're looking for vaccine X, this is the class you're going to load. When you're looking for vaccine Y, this is the class you're going to load, so on and so forth. So what we did is we extended off then the requisite objects. You tell it to where to go look, it uses the strings, it can go ahead and bring it up into memory, and then everybody's happy. So with 85 lines of code, that means that we had 20 teams that didn't write code. The challenge then was to get other people to know that we had that stuff out there. I think the best discussion I had with a couple of the architects, well, first of all, we were having a discussion about Spring Boot. And for your own information, you can usually tell how irritated somebody is with you by how they say boot. They're mildly irritated when the T is pronounced. Boot. What's going on with your Spring Boot project? They're really, really irritated when it gets a vowel added. Hey, what's going on with your Spring Boot? I don't know about this Spring Boot project. So we had a discussion about memory, and somebody said, hey, why is this thing using so much more memory than the other application? I don't know. I don't care. I don't want to know. I don't want to care. But this was the thing that they got hung up on. So I said, well, let's ask ourselves a question. Is it relevant? Is it relevant to what's going on? Is it causing you an issue? No. Is it causing a performance problem? No. So we went through all the list and it was no. So then I turned around and said, let me ask you another question. Do you realize you don't even need this application? Because you have a service sitting between another service that passes that information to a third service. You don't need these two services. So guess what? If you just get rid of that service, your memory problem's solved. That's where I got the boot. So, since it's 12:30, and I went through the rest of this stuff there pretty quick, and I can't put the rest of the code up there, I'll let everybody get 30 minutes back before we go eat, but I'll be up here in case anybody wants to have a discussion. Thanks for your time. I know you could have done a lot of other things. Just glad that you decided to listen to me up here ramble. So thanks very much.